Okay, for more perspective on how carbon credit offset market is working, let's bring in Saleem Ali. He is the Blue and Gold Distinguished Professor of Energy and the Environment at the University of Delaware. Thanks very much for joining us. I certainly appreciate it. I want to get right to it and just kind of give folks a quick explainer, if that story wasn't clear enough, what carbon credit system is supposed to do.
Well, the key aspect of a carbon credit system is that you are going to offset emissions which are occurring in other parts of the world by finding a way whereby carbon can be sequestered back into the earth. So trees provide that service where they actually take carbon dioxide and sequester it back into their own structures or into the soil. So the carbon offset is only going to work if you're actually preventing trees which would otherwise be cut from not being cut. And that's the big question. In your little segment, the gentleman was saying that we go and track those lands where we think trees are going to be cut, and then we prevent the landowners from cutting them. The danger is that there are a lot of these programs that are not providing additional benefit. The landowner may not be cutting the tree anyhow, and now they're being paid for something which they might not otherwise be doing.
Yeah, that's a good point. And look, this has been going on for some time too. It is complex in nature, certainly confusing to many consumers. Let's talk a bit, though, about the landowner program, which we just touched on, and what we have seen at the corporate level.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the corporate level, it's an easy way by which companies can have a transaction and make this a cost of doing business, and they don't have to directly then mitigate some of their own emissions. And so it works out for them from a transaction cost point of view. But again, the same problem remains that you need good verification that you're getting additional benefits. And what is being done now is to have certification programs that some of these offsets need to have independent auditing, where people can go and say, yes, this is actually an additional benefit. It's not just land which would otherwise be there. The other thing is that what kind of crops are being going to be grown. There is a possibility that certain kinds of grasses, for example, switch grasses, which grow very fast, they could provide benefits for cattle ranchers who are able to grow those kinds of grasses that sequester carbon. So there are other ways in which this is also being experimented, not just with trees.
Mr. Ali, in that story, it also talked about the work at that one property is equivalent to 54,000 cars a year, the exhaust that comes out. How does one gauge success, and how critical do you think AI is going to be moving forward to look at tracks that could be up for discussion versus ones that you just talked about earlier that maybe the landowner wasn't going to harvest those trees to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI can be effective in seeing patterns of land use change and looking at geospatial data and seeing where you are going to have more likelihood of degradation based on certain criteria. And what AI does is, what AI needs is data, first of all. So if you don't have data, you don't have AI. So first thing is we need to make sure we get really good high resolution geospatial data, which then is looked at over time. And then you process that so the AI algorithm can learn how to predict what might happen based on past land use practices and patterns of changes. Yeah. So AI can be useful, but it can also be overplayed. It's just the same as blockchain. You'll hear a lot of the carbon offset people say, oh, we are using blockchain, and it impresses people like, wow, that's cool. But the reality is all blockchain is doing is it's making that transfer secure. So if you have bad data going in, it's garbage in, garbage out. The blockchain is of no use if you have bad data going in.
Mr. Ali, we don't have a lot of time, but still this faces a lot of challenges. And we haven't even touched on the fact that there's a big difference between selective cutting and clear cutting for an area. The forest that we showed is very compact and could clearly stand to have some selective cutting without adversely affecting the environment.
Yes, absolutely. You could have that. You could have a good managed forest which is able to achieve some of those goals. You could have certain grasses growing in the understory of the trees. So there are many different ways in which we need to look at it. And that's why we need scientists involved in this process, not just economists.
So we don't have garbage in and garbage out. Dr. Ali, thank you very much. I certainly appreciate your insight. The Blue and Gold Distinguished Professor of Energy and Environment at the University of Delaware. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, calls for an all-out